Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Happy New Year. It is now a leap year. It is also the year of the Summer Olympics and the year of presidential politics, writ even larger in the United States. What will we take from last year, and what have we learned to apply it to 2016? How will the gravitational pull of events like the Emmanuel Church tragedy in the Lowcountry, or the emotionally charged debate around immigration, or interest rate increases, etc., how will all of those and more bend the arc of our business or our policy debates this year? Happy New Year again. Welcome to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. We celebrate 25 years on the air in North and South Carolina. I'm Chris William, and our resident economists look ahead at the possibilities, and it all starts now.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an economic forecast featuring Frank Hefner of the College of Charleston, Doug Woodward from the University of South Carolina, John Connaughton of UNC Charlotte, and Harry Davis from Appalachian State University. Now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Always a spirited debate. Gentlemen, welcome back. Happy New Year 2016. It's got to be the year of the Fed. Finally, right? Fed's going to do something?
Mm-hmm. That's the story.
That's the story. And they're going to keep talking about doing something.
The question is, what effect is that going to have on the rest of the economy?
We got a Fed rate increase. So I guess the question is, does it accelerate, and how much of an increase this year? So at the end of this year, John, where do you think the Fed funds rate is going to be?
Just to put everything in perspective, the Fed's going to meet 8 times in 2016. The FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee, and make decisions about interest rates. I think there are 2 key things about this. One is, if the economy keeps going, there's going to be sort of an impetus to continue to raise rates gradually during 2016. But I think the second thing is that what a lot of folks don't realize is that we are, as of the close of 2015, we have run 78 months in this economic expansion, which makes it the 5th longest expansion of all time. It'll become the 4th longest sometime during 2016 of the 33 on record since 1854 that we've been keeping track of. At some point in time, the Fed needs to put in maneuvering room for the next recession.
Yeah, what does that mean?
That means get the interest rate high enough that they can, when the slowdown comes, they've got some maneuvering room to be able to drop the interest rate to stimulate business. That's their principal tool of trying to motivate or to stimulate the economy. This last time they've used quantitative easing, but they've run their balance sheet up so much, from $600 billion before the financial crisis to $4.5 trillion now, that they're out of room on that. Quantitative easing is not going to be the tool of choice going forward.
Here's the only problem with that is the
wait a minute, before you get down into either agreeing or not agreeing. What do you think federal funds rates are going to do this year?
Go up 1.5, something like that. Okay. Possibly, but here's the reason why I'm a little concerned that may not happen, because the rest of the world's going in the opposite direction. ECB, the European Central Bank, now has a deposit rate that's negative. The rest of Latin America is a mess. You have China engaged in quantitative easing, so everybody else going the other direction. We start raising rates like this, we're going to attract a lot of capital. We're going to see our dollar strengthen. That could cause the recession that John would hope that they would try to be avoiding by raising rates. So I think that could precipitate a major problem if they're not very careful. So I think they're going to go slow.
Yeah, rate forecasts over here?
Well, I agree with on the number. I do disagree on the motivation and everything. I mean, the thing is about yes, they will have wiggle room, but that perceived wiggle room hasn't amounted to much for us the last couple of years. And the quantitative easing has been huge, but it really hasn't gotten us the spark we needed. Some of the issues that you'd like to talk about would be the regulation, productivity,
Exactly.
and issues like that are more structural rather than financial. And so, yes, that is their tool, and they will have no wiggle room if they don't raise it. I agree with that. The dollar issue is a very important one. And what we're going to see worldwide, too, is some interesting changes. The negative interest rates in Europe, completely uncharted territory, and the other one is adding the Chinese currency into the SDR.
I was just add to that. You say, it's uncharted territory, and John says, we wouldn't have any wiggle room, but there is a room to go below zero now.
Yes.
Apparently, let's not forget that.
And the thing about the new norm that we like to talk about is the new norm just is not normal. So any comparison to past expansions just what doesn't hold water anymore. I mean, yes, we can say that the typical expansion expires at a certain time period, but we're not in any typical environment right now.
Harry, how do you see this?
I see no more than 2.25% increases this year. We're not going to raise rates very much. In fact,
So you're saying maybe 75 basis points?
50 this year,
50?
2016.
Okay.
They may actually have to reverse course. The U.S. economy, I think, is not going to grow any quicker this year than last year or for the last 5 years. It's still going to grow around 2.1% perhaps. The rest of the world is pushing rates down as hard as they can go. Not only the banks already mentioned, but the Bank of Japan, they're all doing that.
Right.
You have a global deflation in commodity prices. I think the world economy is going to slow down this year. I don't think the Fed's going to be raising rates very much. They may actually have to reverse course.
Do you think
How much slower can Japan get, though?
Sorry.
Well, it's not in recession.
Do you think cause and effect?
Called it was in a recession. It's actually not.
It's not.
Okay,
It's about 20 years of stagnation.
Yes.
Don't make me come across with both of you guys. I'll stretch it down. Do you think cause and effect between domestic and global is a lot closer than it ever has been before?
Certainly. I mean, we've seen, to Doug's point, what we've seen here for the last 6 months of 2015 has been a situation where ECB has been engaged in quantitative easing. The
European Central Bank.
Right. The Fed has been threatening to raise interest rates for the last 6 months, okay? And as a result of that, we've seen about a 20% appreciation of the U.S. dollar during that period of time. I'm not sure, to Doug's point, I'm not sure that there's a lot more of that available. Maybe another 5 or 10%, but I think there's a limit, even if we are going in one direction raising rates and the ECB is going in the other direction. But I will say, to Harry's point about 50 basis points during this year, I think it'll be maybe a little bit more than that depending on the economy. But there's one thing I think I'm fairly certain of. What the Fed has kind of indicated in some of their forward guidance in some previous meetings is don't expect positive real interest rates anytime soon. And so depending on what the inflation rate is in 2016, I think that's going to be the big guide for the Fed going forward. So if we have another close to 0 or 1% rate of inflation, you're not going to see a federal funds rate past that by the end of the year.
You're not expecting any inflation in 26, any real inflation to talk about, are you?
No.
I'm not. And remember, the Fed has consistently, since the Great Recession, has consistently overpredicted economic growth. I mean, their economists have a very poor
What does that
record.
tell you, Harry?
It tells me that there's something different about this recovery than the previous recoveries in the post-World War II period. There's something different this time. Their models aren't picking up on it at all. And I think it's regulatory overburden on our economy. Now, we can all disagree about that, and people believe that and don't. I believe we have put this ball and chain around the economy with over-regulation. That's one of the reasons I think businesses will not invest in plant and equipment. They literally are sitting on the cash. The regulatory burden's too high. That's killed productivity growth, and so the economy is growing much slower. Demographics, as John mentioned earlier, That's part of it too. But I really do think we're just not investing in the economy because of a regulatory overreach.
So the elephant in the room is the Trump-Sanders comet that's coming close to the Earth during this presidential campaign. And, you know, we kind of laugh about that off camera, but there is an effect there. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And it's not about their personalities to some degree. It is about the effect that they, or rather what they've indicated about the body politic. Or I'm sorry, the electorate.
It has a lot of anxiety. They have anxiety about the economy. They have anxiety about terrorism. All these things feed into, I think, and what they're looking for is something, authenticity. You know, somebody who just speaks, you know, their mind and addresses problems that they do talk about around their dinner table, and they're just not finding it in other candidates. I think that's a major thing driving this.
I think it's frustration. Frustration with the politics and the people that are in politics in this country. I really do think people are very frustrated with our politicians who will not stand up and do the right thing, vote for the right kinds of things. For example, dealing with Social Security and Medicare. They won't deal with these issues, roads and bridges. They won't deal with those issues. And so I think this is frustration. Let's just vote for somebody, or at least say we might vote for somebody, just to sort of put down the whole process or the whole system.
I think the problem is that what happens is when the issues, the solutions are tractable, we tend not to do anything. I mean, the Social Security Commission reviewed this in the 90s. That would have been an easier fix back then to start raising requirements and doing simpler things. What we do is we tend to wait till it becomes intractable and impossible. Just think in terms of the constant budget debates we have, the budget battles, the constant, we're going to shut down government problems. This does play at the dining room table conversation around families, because it does throw in a lot of uncertainty, throws in a lot of question of who are these people, what are they doing to me, and I guess that's a response to that.
Do you think Trump-Sanders will have you think it's going to have a meaningful impact, not on monetary policy, on fiscal debate and fiscal policy?
Probably not. I mean, you know, one of the things that's been interesting about the conversation that's been taking place between the Democrats and Republicans over the past half a dozen years has been about the size of government. And one of the things that's gone kind of almost under the radar has been government spending has flattened out in the last 3 or 4 years. It's damn near flat on a nominal basis. Now, again, no inflation helps, but if you look at it up until the Great Crash and even after the Great Crash, you know, it's clipping along at a 3 to 4% growth rate per year unabated. And then about 2011, 2012, it starts to arc over and kind of cap out. And it's been kind of bumping along at that level, pretty close to virtually no increase in government spending for the past 3 years. It's flown under the radar. We've already had that conversation. We've already capped spending overall. What we haven't done is what Harry mentioned, and that is we haven't started to dig into these kind of the what is it, the 7/8 of the iceberg that's under, that you can't see, and that is what's going to happen in 10, 15 years with Social Security, what's going to happen in 6 or 7 years with Medicare as the population ages and more people tap into these programs.
Yeah. Doug?
I think one thing we're going to learn in 2016 about what effect Trump, to a lesser degree Sanders, has had is Citizens United. I mean, all this money can go into politics. You know, millions of dollars are spent on campaigns, you know, to put an exclamation point at the end of one of the candidates' names. They think that's going to work. Now they're just throwing money into the system, and they're not getting traction.
So your point that Trump uses his own money and doesn't even access
doesn't even spend much
capital?
money. That's what's amazing. You don't have to spend much money apparently in this election to get ahead in the polls, and I think that's going to upset the whole apple cart.
But you do have to be very flamboyant.
Yes.
And so that's
okay.
That's the message that's being sent.
Yeah, I think that's what this campaign is showing us.
Yeah. Now, in terms of back to the regulation issue, well, the inflation issue first, and that is take out energy, we will have an inflation. Take out medical expenses, because we're going to have an inflation if you add medical expenses in, because that's constantly rising. So it depends on how you measure the core inflation and what they're doing, and that's always the battle that the Fed's having. On the regulation issue, I'd like to bring up the No Child Left Behind Act change. And so,
well, what used to be the No Child Left Behind Act that is now gone.
Which is now gone. However, it does speak to the fact of this overriding government regulation, one size fits all for every state, and it's going to be imposed on the states and on the system. And that just can't work. And I think that's what a lot of people are rebelling against.
Is this a good change for education in the United States and in the Carolinas? That Every Child Succeeds Act, as it's called now?
Well, it goes back to the debate. And I mean, this is going to be debated for a long time. Is local control and local response a more efficient model than a federal response? And when localities are doing their job correctly and states are doing their jobs correctly, the answer is that is a better response. But when they're leaving certain segments of the population behind, then no, it's not a good response. So you do need federal oversight.
The one thing that you'll get out of this, though, are 50 states experiments.
Yes.
And, then 5 years or 6 years down the road, you can take a look at, okay, which 5 or 6 states have been most successful, and the other states can start adopting that. When you have one size fits all, you don't get those experiments, and so you don't get that information.
Yeah. Will we see an advent in renewed interest in transit and transportation to find some money to build roads, to find some money to build light rail in some of the urban cores?
Well, in the context of in South Carolina, we ran a budget surplus. I just think so. I think this is the year we're going to finally get some.
But did you think that at the beginning of 2015,
yes, I did.
When Speaker Lucas said we're going to make this work in the South Carolina Senate?
Yes,
South Carolina?
yes, I did. But I'm still sticking with that. I think 2016.
I'd like to see it happen. I'm not sure that it will, but it really needs to take place at the federal level rather than at the state level. The federal level, they can raise gas taxes and it applies to everybody. We don't want one state going after another state in terms of that tax. We could raise a lot of money at the federal level, and that's where we could really do some stuff in terms of mass transit and all kinds of things. And I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it'll happen this year.
Yeah, and Harry, in the Piedmont, North Carolina, there's a very emotional debate around toll roads.
Yes.
Are toll roads, I mean, whether you agree with them or not, is it overreaching to say they will be here and they will be here to stay and we'll see more of them?
Well, I think, yes, I think they will be here, they will stay. I think it's a big mistake in this sense. We're going to build toll roads because we're not willing to raise taxes to get the money to build regular roads. So we're going to go to toll roads where we let the people pay for it when they get on it. Apparently that's the only way we can do it in this country at this point in time. Other states are doing it, so we're going to follow suit. We're going to do it too. I think it's a mistake. I think we ought to raise the taxes and build the roads.
Two aspects of toll roads. One aspect is this most recent adventure with the I-77 corridor. They didn't stop it, but the state may now start to think twice about how they approach the next toll, what we call hot lanes, high occupancy in toll, and the kind of political inputs that they're going to have before they go about this. This one was sort of behind the scenes done, and it was a fait accompli by the time anybody got to input. So I think that's one thing. But I think the second thing that's going on here that we cannot lose sight of is that toll lanes are basically punish the poor and punish the lower income and middle class. Because some of these roads are going to have per mile prices in excess of $1 during rush hour to get on those. And while
dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing. Yeah, okay. And so while that may not affect the guy in the Lexus, it's probably going to affect the guy in the Toyota. And so one of the things that Harry's approach to this, and that's raise gas taxes, kind of spreads the burden. Everybody has equal access and pays the same price for congestion. So,
and there's never been a better time to do it. With energy prices at this level at the pump, of course we should be raising gas taxes.
Yeah.
If you see the kind of growth in Charleston, and if you see more growth in the Midlands, certainly in Greenville there's a toll lane it's been so kind of successful, kind of not. Would you expect to see the same toll debate going on in South Carolina?
I don't think so. Yeah. No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah,
in
I
fact,
agree.
We're still trying to figure out how we're going to do road funding.
You have one upstate. We have
one upstate, and there's one on Hilton Head also.
Hilton Head, and that's it. I've seen this in California. We try to connect these toll roads to the freeways, as we call them. It doesn't work very well. First of all, they're way underutilized. Also, it's just inefficient. If you're on Google Maps and you don't pay attention to tolls, and you hit one of these. In California, you've actually got to have the change in your pocket to get through that. Otherwise, they take your picture, and then there's a whole rigmarole.
Or you could be
but the drivers in California are very patient with you when you come up to those and you don't have cash. And I'm saying that from experience. Okay, we got about 6 minutes left. And affordable, you're laughing, Harry. I know you experienced that. Affordable Care Act. What are we going to see in 2016 from the ACA?
Oh boy.
We could be approaching the death spiral.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means that adverse selection, only the sick people buy in, and it becomes prohibitively expensive to run the system. We knew going in And let me just be clear about this. I am in favor of expansion of medical care and medical insurance for all people in the United States. So I'm not talking about this from philosophical differing opinion. But I think we all knew going in there were so many flaws in that act that it was very unlikely, without the ability to patch some of the problems over time, and with gridlock that hasn't happened, that this act might wind up in a death spiral at some point in time, and we're getting real close to that. And there are, what is it now, 15 million people that are buy insurance through the Affordable Care Act, and so.
Well, financially, it is in a spiral right now. I mean, the costs are greater than anticipated, and the cost savings to the individuals have not materialized. So it's
and providers are dropping out.
And providers are dropping out.
The whole thing rested on the premise that we were going to get cost savings.
Right.
Without that part of it, without massive cost savings, the whole thing almost falls under its own weight, and that.
Well, early on, we did see some cost savings, but yeah, it looks like that's just leveled out.
Does it take down with it some hospitals, some healthcare providers, and some insurers?
Well, hospitals are doing what everybody else is doing. They're all merging, acquiring each other, cutting cost. Is there a medical practice left in the United States? They've all become parts of hospitals. I mean, people don't set up their practices anymore. They've just become part of a hospital.
Hospital group, yeah.
I live in Boone, and they're almost all now part of the hospital, all the practices.
So
cut cost.
Can you give us something optimistic about healthcare in the United States in 2016? Do you expect?
I'm going on a
All
diet.
right, take that one.
That's about the only optimistic thing I can say.
Okay. Minimum wage. Are we going to see a debate in a presidential year about raising minimum wage, and is it a good thing if we do raise minimum wage?
I think Hillary Clinton will bring this up in her campaign, being pushed by Bernie Sanders. I think it'll be debated. Nothing is going to be done, but it will be done at the local level. California, I was out there. They raised minimum wage. It's going up to $15 an hour. It's already having an impact on small businesses. So
in what way?
Well, not necessarily. Well, in a lot of ways, actually. In some ways, you are seeing some people being laid off. They're introducing technology. It's capital labor substitution, as you might expect. Also, what's happening is restaurants are moving away from a tipping model. Some are just going to, flat out, you pay what's actually on the menu, and that's it. And it's redoing. They're paying people more in the back of the restaurant and less up front. That's happened.
Well, what we're going to see is the age-old problem. A high minimum wage at 0 hours is not a good wage. And so it's the job loss issue on raising minimum wage. It's always a question.
Is that an anomaly, or is that going to be a practice?
No, that's been documented research.
The literature is very clear
on that. And the issue,
what increases the minimum wage do. For those who retain their jobs, it's great. But for that portion of the workforce that gets laid off, not so good.
So is this potential entrants who never actually get into that? And a lot of the jobs that are subject to minimum wage are unfortunately low-skilled jobs, which is a fantastic entryway into the labor market force for a lot of young people. And if that's not available, then they just end up dropping out of the workforce. And that's not good for a country. That's not good.
If you adjust the minimum wage for inflation, it's at a 30-year low.
Right.
I mean, in real terms, it hasn't been raised in 30 years.
Right.
I think there'll be some movement to move it upward, and I think they'll actually do it. Certainly, I think Hillary Clinton will. Yeah, I think Congress will actually. Pass.
But not 15.
No, not anywhere near 15. But it hasn't been raised for so long in real terms. I really do think they'll actually raise it.
In the 2 minutes we have left, tell us, we're going to go around the table here, and Harry, we'll start with you. Tell us, what do you think is going to be the surprise at the end of 2016? What are you going to watch more closely than maybe interest rates or unemployment or inflation?
Wow. Well, I think we're going to be somewhat disappointed this year with the fact that the economy for a 7th year continues to grow at about 2%. The unemployment rate's not going to go any lower. I mean, it's at 5%. It's not going to go much lower than that. The big problem with the economy, one of the problems I think, is the labor participation rate. That's at a 38-year low. I think it's going to continue to stay there.
Okay.
We need more people as a percentage of the population working than we have today, and that's going to be very difficult with the aging population. We need an immigration reform to help with that.
So expansion but tepid. What do you think, Frank?
Well, I'm going to be watching mostly the political debates to see what that does to the productivity and regulation issues. And I think what's happening is because of the flamboyancy that's out there, is we're going to be driven to some potentially dramatic, radical possible solutions, which may or may not pass, and that will create more gridlock and other problems. So that's what I'm going to be focusing mostly on.
Yeah. Quickly over here, John.
I'm going to be looking at interest rates and the value of the dollar, particularly as it relates not so much to the euro as it does to Canadian dollar and the peso, because those are really big trading partners.
Okay, 5 seconds.
Well, we've got a very narrow look. We're looking at the impact of the flood. It's negative in last year, 2015. Going into next year, we're looking at it as a positive, actually, for the economy. So we're going to be evaluating that.
Well, you know, we're going to play all this back a year from now, so please come back. Guys, thank you for being here. Always nice to see you all. Thank you. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Happy New Year. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care, when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.